Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel Kalanati. Today I'm going to be wrapping up the books I read for the 2017 BooktubeAthon, and if you've seen my TBR, this stack of books may look surprisingly familiar because I actually stuck to my TBR really well. So let's get straight into it. For the challenge, read a book with a person on the cover, I read Reading the Bones by Sheila Finch. This is a science fiction novel about mistaken communication between humans and an alien species called the Freddy. Most of the action takes place on this planet that humans call Krishna, where the Freddy people live. And humans have mistakenly thought that the Freddy were very docile and that they didn't have a very sophisticated language or society, and then the Freddy kind of rebel against humans. The first half of this book is told from the point of view of a man from the Guild of Xenolinguists who is trying to help two girls get off the planet during the Freddy uprising. The second half is told from those two girls' perspectives in the future. One of them has been left behind on the planet and the other one has joined the Guild of Xenolinguists. The plot, I guess, is that the Freddy are trying to develop their own writing system, which has something to do with a major secret about where their species came from and a son that was put like in a Dyson sphere by another species, and another species wants this information and they're using humans as an intermediary to talk to the Freddy. I'm kind of confused. Essentially, humans involve themselves in the Freddy's own business when they should not. And there's a prime directive rule in the story that's heavily implied and talked about, but it's applied haphazardly and in contradictory ways. The main example is that in the first half, this man from the Xenolinguist Guild says that he cannot invent a new symbol for the Freddy language because that would be interfering, and yet he has just helped the Freddy choose symbols for their language. It's completely contradictory, and I did not like how humans were doing all of the work for the Freddy. Basically, you have another character who grows up with the Freddy, becomes a leader in their community, and is making all these decisions for them. I'm like, is this supposed to be a story about what humans do, or is it a story about what the Freddy do? Because this is very muddled. I did not get what the point of a lot of this was, and I think that this is the latest in a long series of short stories or novellas that Finch has written in this universe, so there may be more backstory, more world building, more explanation for what this Guild of Xenolinguists does, but that is missing from this story. So read as a standalone, I had a lot of questions about the broader context. I liked the linguistic aspects, but it wasn't very clear on plot, which is gonna be a huge downfall no matter how much I like the linguistics. For the challenge, read a book in one day, I read Monstress Volume 2, The Blood. This is written by Marjorie and illustrated by Takeda. I enjoyed this volume more than the first one, purely because the plot has finally crystallized. I understand where the story is going now, and that was my major criticism of the first volume, that it was luscious and gorgeous and had so many female characters and great world building, but there was so much stuff packed into those first couple of issues that the plot was a bit unclear. But the second volume is much more straightforward. So this is about a young woman named Micah Halfwolf who has a terrifying, perhaps evil, and uncontrollable power inside of her that she did not ask for, and she is investigating the secrets of her dead mother in an attempt to discover why she is this way and how she can control this thing inside of her or get rid of it. Once again, Takeda's artwork is utterly gorgeous. I love the detail, I love the coloring, and I love the kind of steampunk Asian fusion of the entire series. The interesting thing in the second volume is that I've noticed how unlikable the main character is, and I think that is actually a point in favor of this series, that it dares to have a female protagonist who is not likable. It's kind of audacious in that regard. I do like some of the other characters, which probably helps me get past the grumpiness of the main character, perhaps. I love the little fox child, just so cute. So yeah, I enjoyed it, and I hope that maybe there will be another volume this year, but I suspect this will come out only once a year. Then I had to read a hyped book for the next challenge, and I chose Magic for Beginners by Kelly Link. She's a very well-regarded short story writer, and I think this is her second or third collection, and the first thing I read by her, well, I'll take that back. I think I read a short story by her from Strange Horizons back in like 2015, and I recall nothing of it. Frankly, I did not like this collection. I had to go look up what genre Link's fiction is categorized as, and it's something called slipstream fiction. And as far as I can tell, it is very surreal, not exactly magical realism, but just bizarre elements put together. It doesn't make much sense, and then often the stories just stop. There's no like climax, there's no real plot, and I hate that. It drove me crazy. So there are a number of stories in this, and I only liked one of them. I liked the first story, which is called The Fairy Handbag. It's the least weird one, which is probably why I liked it. The second story is called The Hortlock, and I also kind of liked it. It strongly reminded me of some Welcome to Night Vale elements. In fact, it occurred to me that maybe the writers of Welcome to Night Vale had read the story, and everything else in this I did not like. We'll just leave it at that. This genre, this type of story, I do not get along with it. I do intend on giving Kelly Link a second chance. I have her other collection, Stranger Things Happen, on ebook. I got it for free somewhere, so I will try to read that, but if after a second shot I still don't get along with this type of story, I will have to leave it there. Another one of the challenges was to read about a character who is very different from you, and this is where I chose to read a Shakespeare play because I read one of his plays every year for BooktubeAthon. I chose Measure for Measure mostly because Libby loves this play and she's been encouraging me to read it for a while, so I think this made her very happy that I chose to read this. This was a far cry from reading Titus Andronicus last year because that was one of my least favorite Shakespeare reads. Not a bad play, but very brutal, much more violent and disgusting and very rapey from the other things I've read by Shakespeare. I didn't enjoy reading that at all. Measure for Measure was a much more pleasant read, and I liked it while I was reading it. But admittedly, I have not thought about this play at all since I finished reading it, and I'm not sure why. Probably because the themes of this one, which is very heavily about marriage and the marital status of these three couples, I don't find that super interesting. So this play is about how the Duke of Vienna isn't comfortable enforcing all the laws upon his people, so he decides to give his power to a man named Angelo. Angelo kind of shows his true colors when he's given authority, and he decides to very strictly enforce all of the city's laws. He condemns a man named Claudio to death for having premarital sex with his fiancée/wife Juliet, who is now visibly pregnant. And this seems incredibly unjust because are Claudio and Juliet actually married or not? Do you deserve to die if you have premarital sex? Because Claudio and Juliet and the other two couples in the story are kind of in this no man's land territory. They've gone through some of the procedures to get married, but not all of them. So they may refer to each other as husband and wife, but they might not legally, technically be married. But it seems like a lot of society would consider them to be married. Claudio's sister Isabella is convinced to reason with Angelo to try to argue him into sparing Claudio's life. he like falls in lust with her, probably because she is arguing very reasonably and intelligently with him, and he demands that she have sex with him, and if she does, he will spare Claudio's life. And it goes from there. So I found Angelo to be disgusting, and perhaps rightfully so. He is like the hypocrite of the story in that he wants to rape a woman, he wants to have sex with a woman who is not his wife, at the same time that he has condemned a man for having sex with a woman who is not his wife. Technically, you know? I also didn't quite understand what the Duke is doing. The Duke is wandering around disguised as a friar, pulling a lot of the strings in the plot. And he basically convinces people to do certain things that he then condemns them for when he is revealed to be the Duke. I don't understand why. However, it's a really interesting story to pull apart and see how it works, and even though I don't find the discussion of the marriage rituals and everything of this time to be that interesting, I think I might be more into this if I saw it performed as a play rather than reading it, because I really liked the characters. They seemed a little less cardboardy, I guess, especially the female characters who are motivated by so many things, who have very complex roles in the story. I don't tend to think of the women in Shakespeare's plays as very empowered female characters with their own agency, particularly because most of them end up married in relationships, etc., and then silenced after that point. But the themes in this play could be interpreted very differently depending on how it's actually performed. So the themes of like female sexuality in it would be really interesting to see performed in a modern adaptation. So once again, I say this after every time I read a Shakespeare play, if you have a performance or an adaptation of it that you think I should find and watch, please let me know. I'm getting down to the less well-known Shakespeare plays that I don't have ready examples of performances for, so I appreciate any help you can give me. Then came the most challenging of all challenges, to read a book entirely outdoors. I am not alone in not liking this challenge. I think there's a vocal majority that didn't enjoy this one. I'm happy because the weather here cooperated much better than I thought it was going to. It was tolerable to be outside most of the week, but I was being eaten by bugs and my allergies were acting up, so I did not enjoy this challenge. I succeeded, but I didn't enjoy it. The book that I read for it was pretty good. This is Changing Planes by Ursula Le Guin. It's a short story collection centered around this premise that a woman named Sita Dulip invents a method to like slide into other universes, into other planes, while waiting in an airport to catch your connecting flight. It's a big pun on changing planes. This collection is not plot driven. These stories are more like vignettes, anecdotes that describe the people, the places, their customs and histories. It's very anthropological in the way that Le Guin's fiction can be. The most notable example that comes to mind for me is Always Coming Home, but it also reminded me of reading Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino, because you're just constantly going to another world, another city, describing these people. Some of these stories were rereads for me. I've read so many of Le Guin's collections that there's quite a bit of overlap between them. My favorite story was The Silence of the Asonu, which was a reread, and once again, I really, really enjoyed it. It's kind of about the bizarre things that people will invent, the theories that we create to turn something very mundane into like a religion or a myth. You know, is silence really wisdom, or is it just silence? I love that story. I can now say that please ignore the terrible cover. There are editions with better covers. The stories inside are well worth reading. Not incredibly impactful, I would say, but very pleasant. Now on to the 6th challenge, which was to read a book that you bought because of the cover. The closest thing I could get to a cover by was Lightless by C.A. Higgins. This science fiction novel is about the 3-person crew of an experimental spaceship called the Ananke, who are headed out on a secret mission. The spaceship is infiltrated by 2 men, one of whom escapes, the other is captured and interrogated about what they intended to do on board. Were they just thieves, or did they plan sabotage? A woman comes on board to interrogate this man. She has a theory that he has connections with, knows the true identity of a terrorist called the Maltinos, who is trying to foment a revolution, like a rebellion against the system being the surveillance state that all these characters live within. I really enjoyed multiple aspects of this story. I was very curious about the experimental spaceship, the Ananke. I wanted to know how it was built and what its mission was, which I don't think is completely answered here. There's also the birth of an artificial intelligence in the story, which I didn't think made complete sense, but I still thought that that was interesting because usually AI characters are already established at the beginning of stories, but this one is about how the AI is created. And I really did like the bit about bringing down the surveillance state. The system sounds like it's a pretty awful, tyrannical government to live within, but most of the characters just take this for granted and think that everything is fine. So that kind of subversion where you end up kind of rooting for the terrorists was really interesting. However, the interrogation of this one guy who's captured is the driving force of almost all 300 pages, and it lasted way too long. It was like one scene that just didn't have clever enough dialogue. It didn't have surprising enough twists, that it was just kind of boring. An interrogation like that shouldn't have taken so long, and I was very unimpressed by the woman who is interrogating him. She's supposed to be very in control, very powerful, good at breaking people, and I thought she was not. She was a tad too obviously villainous to be believable or enjoyable, I guess. So despite that, despite how I think the story lagged in parts because this interrogation just was not fast enough, the ending was pretty explosive, and I would definitely like to continue with the next book, so I'll have to get that eventually. The 7th and final thing I read for BooktubeAthon was The Core of the Sun by Johanna Sinisalo. I enjoyed this so much that I'm going to do a separate review on it, so just very briefly here, this is kind of in the vein of The Handmaid's Tale, featuring a society where women are supposed to be very submissive, and it also features capsaicin addiction and the banning of chili peppers from Finland. It wasn't as weird as I thought it was going to be, and I really enjoyed it. So more thoughts on this one forthcoming. And that is it for my BooktubeAthon wrap-up. It was really enjoyable this year, though I was slightly disappointed that there weren't any automatic favorite books. In previous years that I've done BooktubeAthon, I've read some things that like ended up on my best of the year list, and this year wasn't quite like that. On the other hand, I got 7 books off of my physical books to be read shelf, which makes me really happy. If you have read or if you want to read any of these books, please let me know down in the comments. If you participated in BooktubeAthon, I hope you had an amazing time. I hope you got a lot of reading done. Let me know how you did. Thank you very much for watching me once again this week, and I'll be back to talk to you again soon with a couple of reviews that I've been meaning to get out for a while. I'm gonna finally do that. And until then, bye.